90% of the theories about the Antikythera mechanism are wrong for the same reason. They begin with a machine that no longer exists. The complete, gleaming devices seen in museums, documentaries, and viral animations were not recovered from the sea. They are modern reconstructions built around 82 corroded fragments, only about 1/3 of the original object. Most of the mechanism's front workings are gone. Every image of moving planets, rotating rings, and perfectly nested gears, therefore, contains choices the ancient maker did not leave us. And the missing piece that can expose those choices is not a secret wheel still lying inside the wreck. It is the part almost always removed from the picture. The inscribed cover that once stood between the gears and the person turning the handle. That figure, 90%, is not the result of a published survey counting every theory ever proposed. It is a warning about a recurring mistake. Possibility is repeatedly presented as discovery. Call the mechanism a navigation computer, a prophecy machine, the personal invention of Archimedes, or evidence of an impossibly advanced lost civilization. And the same problem appears. The story outruns the surviving metal. The fragments prove that this device calculated astronomical cycles with extraordinary mechanical sophistication. They do not reveal its owner, its exact workshop, its complete gearing, or the precise reason someone carried it aboard a ship. To investigate honestly, we must keep 3 different objects separate: the fragments in Athens, the ancient machine from which they came, and the modern machines researchers build to fill the spaces between them. The mystery began with a wreck discovered near the Greek island of Antikythera in 1900. Sponge divers recovered statues, glassware, pottery, and bronze objects from a ship that had vanished beneath the Mediterranean more than 2,000 years earlier. Among those treasures was an unremarkable mass of corroded bronze and decayed wood. It did not resemble a computer. It barely resembled a manufactured object. Then, in 1902, a geared fragment was recognized among the materials stored in Athens. Teeth appeared where no one expected teeth to be. That moment did not solve the artifact. It made the problem far more disturbing. How could such dense, carefully coordinated clockwork belong to the ancient world? And why did nothing else remotely as complete survive beside it? What remains today is not a machine waiting to be repaired. It is closer to a collapsed building whose most important rooms have disappeared. 30 bronze gears survive, many crushed together, displaced, or hidden beneath layers of corrosion. Other components exist only as broken scales, partial rings, empty bearing holes, faint inscriptions, and impressions left when one surface pressed against another. The original mechanism almost certainly contained additional parts, particularly at the front, but their number and arrangement remain disputed. This means that every complete replica is an argument. A reconstruction may be mechanically brilliant, mathematically accurate, and beautiful to watch, and still be historically wrong. The fact that someone can build a working version proves only that the version is possible, not that an ancient craftsperson built it that way. The rear of the mechanism eventually surrendered some of its secrets because more physical evidence survived there. Advanced X-ray scanning revealed a 19-year calendar cycle connecting solar years with 235 lunar months. Another spiral dial represented the 223-month Saros cycle, allowing the machine to indicate when eclipses were possible and to preserve details about their expected characteristics. A smaller display marked a 4-year cycle associated with major Greek athletic festivals. Deep inside the fragments, an ingenious pin and slot arrangement reproduced the moon's changing apparent speed. These were not decorative motions. The mechanism translated recurring relationships in the sky into carefully selected gear ratios. Yet this extraordinary success created a trap. Because much of the rear could be reconstructed with confidence, people began speaking about the missing front with the same confidence. The two sides do not offer equal evidence. We know that the mechanism coordinated calendars, modeled the moon, and organized eclipse information. Surviving inscriptions also provide strong evidence that the front presented the sun, the moon, and the 5 planets known in antiquity: Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. But knowing what appeared on a display is not the same as possessing the machinery that produced it. Several serious reconstructions can generate plausible planetary motions, while using radically different gears, shafts, pointers, and rings. Even the description ancient computer can mislead us if it suggests a general-purpose calculating device. This was a specialized astronomical calculator. What its original audience did with that information, teach, demonstrate, impress, plan, or study, remains much less certain than the movement of its surviving gears. Now we reach the piece almost invisible in popular retellings. The ancient operator probably did not stare into an exposed forest of bronze wheels. The mechanism was housed inside a wooden frame case, with dials and protective bronze plates at the front and back. Those plates carried inscriptions. In other words, the object had an interface. It told its user what was being displayed, how the cycles were organized, and how the moving indicators should be understood. Modern replicas frequently strip away this outer layer because the gears are visually spectacular. But once the covers disappear, the machine loses the evidence closest to its intended audience. Its identity may be recorded more clearly on its skin than in its skeleton. The gears reveal what the device could calculate. The interface reveals what its maker wanted someone to see. In 2005, microfocus X-ray computed tomography allowed researchers to look through the corroded fragments and recover thousands of tiny Greek characters, some hidden inside material that had been unreadable for 2 millennia. The surviving back cover text described external features of the instrument, including its astronomical display. The front cover inscription preserved information about recurring planetary events and the intervals between them. Most strikingly, the text referred to small spheres representing celestial bodies, including a small golden representation of the sun. This is why a planetary display is not merely an imaginative addition to the mechanism. The machine's own damaged voice points toward it. But that voice is fragmentary, and it describes visible results far more clearly than the invisible gear trains that created them. That distinction changes the standard of proof. A convincing reconstruction must satisfy every independent constraint at once. Surviving tooth counts, positions of axles, available space inside the case, remnants of dials, the order of celestial bodies, astronomical period relations, and the wording of the inscriptions. Solving only the mathematics is not enough. Building a gear train that fits inside a box is not enough. Producing a beautiful model of the heavens is not enough. The machine must satisfy the evidence without quietly inventing evidence of its own. Most sensational explanations collapse under the first few tests. Even sophisticated scholarly models may fit some clues while placing others under strain. The more complete and polished a reconstruction appears, the easier it becomes to forget which pieces were recovered from the sea and which were created on a modern workbench. Then 2 numbers emerged from the damaged front cover inscription: 462 in the section associated with Venus and 442 in the section associated with Saturn. A modern research team interpreted them as parts of highly accurate planetary period relations. 289 synodic cycles of Venus in 462 years, and 427 cycles of Saturn in 442 years. These relationships are especially important because their numbers can be broken into factors suitable for manageable gear trains. Suddenly, faint characters on a broken bronze plate were not merely labels. They looked like instructions encoded in arithmetic. A few surviving numerals could determine which gear ratios were plausible, which arrangements could fit inside the case, and which famous reconstructions had solved the wrong mechanical problem. The writing was no longer decoration around the machine. It was beginning to control the machine from beyond its destruction. But the inscriptions are not an exploded engineering diagram. Whole sections are gone. Individual letters are damaged. Some readings depend on combining fragments or examining impressions left on adjacent material. The text can tell us that a planet appeared as a small sphere without showing the exact axle, ring, or pointer that carried it. It narrows the possibilities, but it does not reduce them to one unquestionable answer. That is the missing piece almost nobody outside the specialist literature discusses. Not simply a lost gear, but the boundary between description and reconstruction. Ignore the covers, and speculation floods into the empty space. Treat the covers as a complete manual, and confidence outruns the text. The real mechanism survives in the narrow territory between those 2 errors. One phrase now brings us to the next stage of the mystery. The planets were represented by small spheres. It sounds like a minor detail. Mechanically, it is explosive. A sphere attached to a conventional pointer requires one kind of display. A sphere carried around a concentric ring requires another. The 2 solutions create different problems of depth, crowding, visibility, and parallax, and they demand different internal machinery. The surviving front gears are no longer there to settle the argument. All we have is damaged language, severe physical constraints, and several reconstructions claiming to satisfy both. In Part 2, we will open the mechanism's broken instruction manual line by line, because one ancient description of how those spheres moved may force some of the most famous models of Antikythera to be redrawn. The most revealing part of the Antikythera mechanism did not survive as a readable bronze page. It survived as a shadow. While the device lay underwater, one of its inscribed covers corroded against a layer of marine accretion. Much of the plate itself was eventually lost, but portions of its lettering remained as offsets. Ghostly impressions transferred onto the material beside it. The result is almost archaeological irony. Parts of the manual can be read because the manual was destroyed. Researchers are therefore not studying a continuous paragraph engraved on an intact surface. They are assembling scattered characters from broken bronze, compressed layers, and negative traces left by an object that no longer exists. And those traces describe the very front display whose machinery is now mostly missing. Reading these inscriptions is nothing like translating an ordinary ancient text. The surviving letters can be little more than a millimeter high. Corrosion has merged strokes, split words, and hidden one line beneath another. Microfocus X-ray computed tomography allowed researchers to examine internal surfaces without separating the fragile fragments, while advanced photographic techniques revealed shallow marks under changing illumination. Even then, the machine does not speak in complete sentences. Scholars must compare letter shapes, estimate line lengths, identify repeated formulas, and decide which restorations fit the available space. Some readings are secure, others are probable. A few depend on missing words reconstructed from context. That uncertainty is not a weakness to be concealed. It is the first rule for understanding why a single translated phrase can produce several mechanically different Antikythera mechanisms. Two major cover texts emerge from this damaged evidence, and they perform different jobs. The inscription associated with the back cover appears to have been a systematic description of the machine's external features. Remarkably, it began by explaining the front display before continuing to the dials at the rear. The front cover inscription served another purpose. It organized information about the cycles of the 5 visible planets and described significant events in their motion relative to the Sun. One text told the operator what the machine contained. The other helped explain what its moving indicators meant. Taken together, they were not decorative labels added after construction. They formed an information system connecting the astronomical theory inside the box to the human being standing outside it. The order of the celestial bodies is one of the strongest constraints hidden in that system. The sequence corresponds to a familiar Greek geocentric arrangement: the Moon, Mercury, Venus, the Sun, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. Earth belonged at the center because the display represented the sky as it appears to an observer on Earth. This does not mean the maker was simply drawing a primitive picture of the universe. The order determined how the outputs had to be layered, how each indicator could remain visible, and how the user distinguished one moving body from another. A modern engineer may find it convenient to rearrange shafts or swap display levels. The inscription does not grant that freedom. Any reconstruction must somehow reproduce the ancient celestial order, while fitting several independent motions into an extraordinarily narrow case. Then come the words that transformed the debate. The planets were represented by small spheres, while the Sun was associated with a small golden sphere, a ray, and a pointer. This establishes something more elaborate than a dial carrying 7 anonymous needles. The celestial bodies had visible identities. A user could watch miniature planets change position against a zodiacal scale, perhaps recognizing the Sun immediately from its material or color. But the wording does not provide a surviving diagram of the supports beneath those spheres. The 2016 publication of the inscriptions summarized the lost display as pointers carrying small spherical markers. A later reconstruction placed greater emphasis on references to circles or rings and proposed that the planetary spheres moved on separate rotating bands. The text narrows the possibilities dramatically, yet it does not eliminate interpretation. The pointer solution has a distinguished history. Michael Wright constructed a functioning planetary system in which several coaxial pointers emerged from the center, each carrying an output for a celestial body. This was an essential breakthrough because it demonstrated that a compact ancient mechanism could reproduce planetary cycles using technologies consistent with the surviving artifact. But feasibility is not identity. Stack enough pointers on one axis, and the display becomes crowded. Their different heights can also make the apparent reading change with the observer's angle, a parallax problem emphasized by later researchers. More importantly, a central pointer tells you where a planet is on the zodiac, but it does not automatically explain the additional cyclical information written on the cover. Wright's model answered the question: could planetary motions be mechanized? It did not prove that his display was the one recovered from a sea. The competing ring model attempts to solve that problem by giving each celestial body its own moving circular band. In the 2021 reconstruction proposed by a University College London team, nested tubes carry a sequence of rings arranged in the inscribed cosmological order. Small spherical markers identify the planets, while the Sun occupies its own ring, and the surrounding scales show the zodiac and Egyptian calendar. Such an arrangement reduces the visual confusion of stack pointers and provides surfaces on which additional marks could be engraved. Yet the elegance of the result must not be confused with direct survival. The planetary rings themselves were not recovered intact. Much of the gearing that would drive them is theoretical, and the same reconstruction openly includes hypothetical features, including a hand for the Moon's nodes and a proposed system of index letters. It is a powerful model, not a photographed original. The front cover text reveals why those extra markings may have mattered. It does not merely name Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. It discusses stages in their synodic cycles, the repeating patterns created by each planet's changing relationship with the Sun as seen from Earth. These include events such as conjunctions, oppositions, greatest elongations, and stationary points, when a planet appears to stop against the stars before reversing direction. To an ancient observer, retrograde motion was one of the sky's most puzzling behaviors. To the mechanism's designer, it became a sequence that could be represented mechanically. Turn the input, and a planetary marker would move forward, slow, pause, reverse, and resume its path. The machine was not just telling time. It was performing a geometrical theory of apparent celestial motion. This leads to one of the most intriguing and least discussed ideas in the modern reconstruction. Elsewhere on the mechanism, letters connected written explanations to particular places on a dial. Alphabetic references linked star events to the zodiac, while eclipse glyphs on the Saros spiral referred the user to additional eclipse information. The 2021 team proposed that the same principle may have connected the front cover text to marks on the planetary rings. As the mechanism turned, the sun's pointer could approach a letter on a planet's ring. That letter would direct the operator to the corresponding line on the cover, where the event and its interval were described. The beginning of many lines is missing, so this indexing system cannot presently be proven. But it would explain why the cover was organized in such a repetitive, carefully ordered form. Imagine the experience if that interpretation is correct. You turn the handle and watch Mars slow against the zodiac. A letter comes into alignment with the solar indicator. The cover identifies the event as a stationary point. Continue turning, count the days passing on the calendar scale, and the mechanism carries Mars backward until the next mark stage. The machine would then do more than display a prearranged celestial picture. It could help the operator measure the intervals between modeled planetary events without calculating them through lengthy geometry. The 2021 researchers suggested that this may even explain how some of the numerical intervals written on the front cover were produced. That remains a hypothesis, but it transforms the cover from a passive instruction sheet into an active component of the computation. This is the missing piece that most popular theories ignore. They ask what the gears predicted while overlooking how the operator retrieved the prediction. A machine without its interface can appear to have almost any purpose: navigation, astrology, education, spectacle, or pure calculation. Restore the relationship between the display, calendar, index letters, and explanatory text, and the possibilities become narrower. Nothing in the surviving inscriptions shows that the device steered a ship or gave a captain his position at sea. Nothing identifies it as an oracle. What the evidence repeatedly emphasizes is structured astronomical information, celestial positions, repeating cycles, observable events, and intervals measured in time. Its true sophistication may therefore lie not in having the greatest possible number of gears, but in integrating gears, scales, markers, and text into a coherent method of inquiry. And then the cover delivers two numbers that the surviving machinery could not provide: 462 in the section concerning Venus, and 442 in the section concerning Saturn. Researchers interpret these as parts of exceptionally long planetary period relations: 289 synodic cycles of Venus in 462 years, and 427 cycles of Saturn in 442 years. These are not predictions that an operator would wait centuries to verify. They are mathematical ratios that can be reduced to gear motion. More importantly, their numbers possess factors that can be distributed among gears small enough to fit inside the case. The manual has suddenly become an engineering fingerprint. Even though the original planetary gear trains are gone, the ratios they may have embodied remain written on the surface. Those numbers create a deeper mystery than any missing pointer. The Venus and Saturn relations are not simply copied from the best-known surviving Babylonian astronomical periods, yet they are both accurate and unusually suitable for mechanical construction. Did a Greek astronomer derive them from older Mesopotamian data? Were they selected by a mathematician specifically because their factors could become gear teeth? Or are modern researchers forcing damaged numbers into an elegant reconstruction that the original maker never used? In Part 3, we will follow 462 and 442 into the mathematics hidden beneath the bronze, because the strongest clue to the lost gears may not be a gear at all. It may be the prime factors of two numbers engraved on a vanished cover. The numbers 462 and 442 do not look like machine parts. They were not recovered as tooth counts on two enormous gears, and they do not tell us where a single axle was placed. Yet they may be among the most mechanical clues preserved anywhere on the Antikythera Mechanism. A date can describe the sky. A ratio can control bronze. Once those two numbers appeared in the inscriptions for Venus and Saturn, researchers were no longer free to select whichever planetary cycles produced the prettiest reconstruction. The lost gears had to reproduce motions accurate across centuries, fit inside a case scarcely larger than a thick book, and use wheels that an ancient craftsperson could actually cut. This is where many theories fail. They solve the astronomy, or they solve the engineering. The original maker had to solve both at the same time. To understand the problem, we must see the planets as the mechanisms operators saw them, from a stationary Earth at the center of the display. Venus does not simply travel around the zodiac at one constant speed. It appears near the sun, moves away from it, slows, reverses direction, disappears into its glare, and later returns. Saturn follows another rhythm, sometimes advancing against the stars, and sometimes appearing to move backward. A synodic cycle measures the interval required for a planet to repeat its relationship with the sun as viewed from Earth. If an ancient engineer could identify a whole number of these cycles that nearly matched a whole number of years, that relationship could become a gear ratio. The heavens would be translated into integers, and integers could be cut into teeth. Venus offered an obvious starting point. 5 of its synodic cycles take almost 8 years, after which the planet returns to nearly the same place in its pattern relative to the sun. The relationship was known in ancient astronomy, and mechanically it is wonderfully simple. 5 cycles against 8 annual rotations. A compact model using this ratio can produce a convincing Venus display. Turn the handle through a few years, and nothing appears wrong. But the repetition is not exact. Each 8-year return carries a small discrepancy, and over longer periods that discrepancy accumulates. A reconstruction based only on the convenient 5 to 8 cycle may work beautifully during a demonstration, while failing to embody the more demanding astronomy written on the mechanism itself. A functioning machine is not necessarily the correct machine. Babylonian astronomy preserved a much longer and more accurate relationship for Venus. 720 synodic cycles in 1,151 years. Astronomically, it was impressive. Mechanically, it was disastrous. The number 1,151 is prime. It cannot be divided into smaller whole number factors that could be distributed conveniently across several ordinary gear pairs. To reproduce that relationship exactly with a conventional compound train, the system would ultimately require a wheel whose tooth count contained the factor 1,151, far beyond anything that could fit inside the Antikythera case. The ancient designer therefore faced a conflict that modern diagrams often conceal. The best-known astronomical ratio was too large to build, while the easiest ratio to build was not accurate enough. Somewhere between them, another number had to exist. That number was 462. In the damaged section of the front cover inscription devoted to Venus, researchers identified it as part of a relationship involving 289 synodic cycles in 462 years. Now the arithmetic changes completely. 289 is 17 multiplied by 17. 462 divides into 2, 3, 7, and 11. Instead of demanding one impossibly large gear, the ratio can be separated across a sequence of moderate wheels. One gear pair can contribute one factor, another pair the next, while their combined rotations preserve the full relationship. Under the geometric constraints proposed for the planetary system, the necessary factors remain small enough to be incorporated into gears with fewer than roughly 100 teeth. The inscription may therefore preserve something astonishing, a planetary cycle selected not merely because it was accurate, but because it could become a machine. Saturn carried the same signature. The inscription's 442-year period has been interpreted as 427 synodic cycles in 442 years. 427 divides into 7 multiplied by 61. 442 divides into 2 multiplied by 13 multiplied by 17. Again, the numbers are accurate enough for long-term planetary modeling, yet their prime factors are manageable. The largest prime is 61, not an impossible 4-digit number. Finding one such relationship could be coincidence. Finding separate long-period relationships for Venus and Saturn, both unusually accurate and both suited to compact gearing, suggests deliberate selection. But it does not reveal a complete gear train. The numbers constrain what the mechanism may have done. They do not, by themselves, show exactly how the maker arranged the metal. A modern research team formalized the designer's challenge using 3 criteria: accuracy, factorizability, and economy. Accuracy kept the displayed planets close to their intended cycles. Factorizability ensured that the ratios could be divided into realistic gear counts. Economy encouraged different planetary mechanisms to share components rather than giving every planet an entirely independent train. In the team's reconstruction, a proposed Mercury period shares the factor 17 with Venus, allowing both systems to use a common 51-tooth fixed gear. Mars and Jupiter are assigned relationships sharing the factor 7 found in Saturn's cycle, helping the superior planets use a common 56-tooth gear. It is a striking design. The planets are not simply squeezed together. Their mathematics allows them to cooperate mechanically. Yet those shared gears are a proposed solution, not gears recovered intact from the wreck. How might an ancient mathematician have discovered such unusually convenient ratios? The same researchers proposed a procedure they called an unconstrained Parmenides process. Beginning with period relationships already available from Babylonian astronomy, the method combines pairs of ratios by adding their corresponding numbers, generating new approximations between the originals. The resulting candidates can then be tested for accuracy, useful factors, and mechanical economy. Applied repeatedly, the process produces the Venus and Saturn relationships found in the inscription and offers candidate cycles for the planets whose numbers have been lost. The method is mathematically elegant and compatible with techniques known in Greek numerical thought. But its name must not mislead us. There is no surviving ancient document stating that Parmenides designed the mechanism, and no workshop notebook records that this exact process was used. This is the moment when reconstruction can quietly become creation. Once a modern method reproduces the two surviving planetary relationships, researchers can extend it into the damaged sections of the inscription and generate proposed periods for Mercury, Mars, and Jupiter. Under the chosen rules, some candidates appear far more economical than others, and several may be almost uniquely favored. But the missing numbers remain missing. The method predicts what they could have been. It does not make them archaeologically visible, change the acceptable error, alter the architecture, or permit a different way of sharing gears, and additional solutions may appear. That does not make the reconstruction arbitrary. It means its certainty has levels. The engraved numbers are evidence. Their prime factors are mathematics. The process used to generate the lost numbers is a historical hypothesis. Then the surviving bronze interrupts the argument. Fragment D contains a gear whose original count can be reconstructed as 63 teeth, attached to an unusual disc and associated with a plate and arbor. 63 divides into 3 multiplied by 3 multiplied by 7. The Venus relationship contains both 3 and 7 among the factors of 462. In the 2021 reconstruction, this 63 tooth will become part of the Venus mechanism. The attached disc provides space for an offset pin, which could drive a slotted follower and reproduce Venus's changing motion and limited distance from the Sun suddenly. The case is no longer based on inscription alone. The period relationship, the prime factors, the tooth count, and the unusual physical form of a surviving component begin pointing in the same direction. That convergence is powerful, but it is not final proof. The 63 teeth are physical evidence. The disc is physical evidence. The interpretation of both as a Venus epicycle remains an expert reconstruction. Most of the surrounding terrain is gone, so the identification must be judged by how much it explains and how few unsupported additions it requires. Any competing model must do more than make Venus move. It must explain why this particular gear had 63 teeth, why a disc was riveted to it, how its arbor was supported, where its neighboring wheels turned, and how the output reached the front display without colliding with the other planets. This is the standard that exposes so many attractive theories. The question is not whether a reconstruction can move. It is whether every surviving scar allows it to move. And the most restrictive scars are waiting on Fragment A. Its enormous main drive will preserve spokes with holes, flattened regions, damaged supports, and traces of pillars at different heights. Those features imply that plates once stood above the rotating wheel, creating narrow compartments for mechanisms that are now gone. In one influential reconstruction, the planetary gears must fit within a space only about 9.7 millimeters deep, while an angled supporting structure must align with the surviving pillars and accommodate the proposed Venus and Mercury systems. The prime factors have supplied possible ratios. Fragment D has supplied a possible planetary component, but neither matters if the complete assembly cannot fit the physical skeleton. In Part 4, we will lower the reconstructed planets into that impossibly thin space, because a few empty holes in Fragment A may be more decisive than every elegant animation ever made. 9.7 millimeters, less than 1 centimeter. In one influential reconstruction, that is the space available for much of the machinery, calculating the true Sun, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. Not the width of the entire mechanism, the depth of one internal chamber. Every gear must rotate without touching the plates above or below it. Every axle must avoid the neighboring trains. Every output must reach the front display in the correct order, while the whole assembly remains thin enough for the original case. An animation can make this look effortless. Bronze is less forgiving. If one shaft crosses another, if one wheel requires an extra millimeter, or if a bearing occupies a space already claimed by a different planet, the theory fails before the handle completes a single turn. Fragment A is where that test begins. At its center lies the large wheel known as B1, the principal surviving structure around which much of the mechanism was organized. Its four spokes are scarred by holes, circular depressions, flattened surfaces, and broken projections. X-ray tomography reveals that some of those projections had shoulders and pierced ends, suggesting that they once supported additional plates. The 2021 University College London team reconstructed 4 short pillars and 4 longer ones. The short pillars carried a narrow, angled plate they called the strap. The longer pillars supported a larger circular plate above it. Neither plate survives intact, but the pillars create something nearly as valuable: fixed levels in space. The missing machinery cannot be placed wherever a reconstruction needs it. The ruins have already drawn the walls of its invisible rooms. Those supports divide the proposed front mechanism into 2 brutally confined compartments. Between B1 and the strap, the UCL model has approximately 15 millimeters in which to place the mean Sun, Mercury, Venus, and a hypothetical lunar node mechanism. The researchers arranged these components in 9 closely packed layers. Between the strap and the circular plate, most of the machinery for the true Sun and the 3 superior planets must fit within only 9.7 millimeters. Altogether, their model adds 34 gears in front of B1. The known systems behind it account for 35 more gear positions, producing a reconstructed total of 69. That number is often repeated, as though archaeologists recovered 69 wheels from the wreck. They did not. Only 30 survive. The rest belong to a highly constrained, but still theoretical, completion. The difficulty is greater because B1 was not simply a stationary foundation. It rotated, carrying some of the lost gears around the central axis, while those gears also turned on their own arbors. This is epicyclic gearing, wheels riding on a moving platform, combining rotations to generate the variable motions seen in the sky. The same principle survives in the mechanism that modeled the moon's changing speed, so its use for the planets is technologically plausible. But the front system must perform a second task at the same time. It must deliver its outputs in the cosmological order described by the inscriptions: Moon, Mercury, Venus, Sun, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. A planetary gear train cannot merely calculate the correct ratio. It must deliver that ratio to the correct depth, through the correct tube, without blocking any celestial body positioned before or behind it. One tiny feature on B1 demonstrates how demanding that delivery problem becomes. On one spoke is a pierced block whose purpose had remained unexplained. The UCL reconstruction uses it to carry a bar transmitting the rotation of the mean Sun, a uniformly moving mathematical sun used internally by the machine. A direct connection at the center would be obstructed by fixed gears, so the proposed bar bridges over them from a point farther along the spoke. This internal mean Sun rotation can then sit beside the lunar output, allowing a differential device to calculate the moon's phase from the difference between lunar and solar motion. Meanwhile, a separate mechanism generates the variable motion of the visible, or true, Sun for the front display. It is an ingenious explanation for an inconvenient hole. Yet the block bears no inscription saying Sun. Its function is inferred because the model needs it and because the geometry fits. Another unexplained bearing appears on a different spoke. The same reconstruction assigns it to a 4-gear system showing the moon's nodes, the 2 points where the lunar path crosses the ecliptic. Its output becomes a double-ended dragon hand, with one end indicating the ascending node and the other the descending node. Such a display would elegantly connect the front of the machine to the eclipse predictions on the back, because eclipses are possible only when a new or full moon occurs near one of those crossings. But here the researchers are explicit. No direct physical evidence proves that the Antikythera mechanism possessed this hand. The bearing is real. The proposed gears are not. This distinction matters because unexplained features exert a dangerous attraction. Once a reconstruction gives one of them a beautiful purpose, elegance can begin to feel like evidence. The proposed Venus and Mercury mechanisms rest on firmer ground. Fragment D contains the unusual 63-tooth gear, its attached disc, a plate, and a connecting arbor. The disc could carry an offset pin needed to produce Venus's changing speed and limited separation from the Sun. The 63 teeth also contain factors useful for generating the 462-year Venus relation preserved in the inscription. Even the angle of the reconstructed strap becomes significant. The UCL team calculates that an inclination of roughly 11 degrees allows the Mercury and Venus trains to occupy the space implied by the short pillars. Here several independent clues converge: an engraved period, a surviving tooth count, an exceptional disc, structural supports, and available depth. This may be the strongest section of the proposed planetary system. But Fragment D does not carry the name Aphrodite. Its identification as Venus remains an interpretation, however persuasive. Above the strap, the evidential ground becomes thinner. No complete surviving gear train shows how the true Sun, Mars, Jupiter, or Saturn was calculated. The UCL solution uses a central fixed gear with 56 teeth, shared across several mechanisms, and compact 7-gear trains for the superior planets. Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn are arranged around the circular plate, their gears interleaved and their arbors passing through different levels. Sharing gears makes the system economical, while the selected tooth counts reproduce the reconstructed planetary periods. The mathematics fits. The computer model fits. Yet this entire upper group occupies the part of the front where direct physical evidence is weakest. The reconstruction becomes most mechanically elegant at exactly the point where the original bronze has almost completely vanished. That does not make it wrong. It means the confidence attached to it must decrease as the evidence decreases. And then all those rotations must pass through the center. The ring display model requires a set of nested output tubes, one inside another, each carrying a different celestial indicator. The tubes must remain concentric, turn independently, and emerge at precisely controlled heights so the planetary rings appear in their inscribed order. Tiny errors would introduce friction, wobble, or contact between outputs. A computer model can demonstrate that idealized components do not intersect. It cannot, by itself, demonstrate how hand-cut bronze parts behaved after assembly, how much backlash accumulated through long trains, how the maker prevented thin plates from flexing, or how damaged parts were serviced inside the wooden case. Those questions do not disprove the design. They reveal another missing layer of evidence, not astronomical theory, but workshop practice, the sequence of construction that transformed diagrams and ratios into a reliable instrument. That is why a functioning replica cannot settle the mystery either. Michael Wright constructed a working planetary model with a different front architecture, proving that ancient-style epicyclic gearing could generate planetary motions in a compact device. More recently, another research group built functional bronze reconstructions while avoiding modern stabilizing components. Their experience led them toward a sharply different interpretation. They argue that remains associated with B1 and a lost disk once carried 2 operational indicators absent from other reconstructions, and that the mechanism should be understood primarily as a self-contained lunisolar time calculator rather than as a full planetary positioner. This is not the present consensus, and it does not erase the inscriptions discussing the planets. But it demonstrates something crucial. Researchers can handle the same bronze, build machines that turn, and still disagree over what the missing front actually did. Put the standards side by side, and the central problem becomes clear. A correct astronomical ratio does not prove the original gear train. A gear train that fits does not prove it could be manufactured or operated as proposed. A working replica proves mechanical possibility, not archaeological identity. An inscription establishes that planetary information belonged to the device, but it may not reveal whether that information appeared through concentric pointers, moving rings, index scales, or some arrangement no modern reconstruction has attempted. The strongest models are those that satisfy several independent constraints at once and openly label their hypothetical additions. Even the UCL team concluded that the loss of evidence prevents its model from being called a replica. That single admission is more important than the visual perfection of any animation. Yet even if the precise front gearing remains unresolved, one conclusion is becoming difficult to escape. The Antikythera Mechanism was not merely a box of clever ratios. It was designed as a complete encounter between a user and a mathematical cosmos. Gears hidden inside, astronomical markers outside, and inscriptions explaining how the two were connected. But that still does not tell us why the instrument was made. Was it a teaching device, a research calculator, a luxury demonstration piece, an astrological aid, or something carried for a purpose connected to the voyage itself? In Part 5, we will leave the gears and follow the names engraved on the calendars, the star lists, the ship's cargo, and the ancient descriptions of similar machines. They point toward different places, and expose why attaching the name of Archimedes to Antikythera may be the most seductive theory of all. The Antikythera Mechanism refuses to come from one place. Its lunar calendar points toward northwestern Greece. Its star calendar appears better suited to a latitude farther south. One of its smallest festival names points directly toward Rhodes, and hovering over all of them is the most famous name in ancient engineering, Archimedes of Syracuse. Each clue has been used to announce the mechanism's birthplace. None can carry that weight alone. The contradiction is not an inconvenience to be explained away. It may reveal how the object was actually created, as a collaboration between different traditions, customized for a particular user, and transported far from the workshop that built it. The mistake is assuming that its calendar, astronomy, craftsmanship, owner, and final voyage must all belong to the same city. The 12-month names engraved around the Metonic spiral do not match the familiar calendars of Athens or Rhodes. They belong to the Corinthian family of calendars, used in Corinth and communities influenced by Corinthian settlement. Early research, therefore, raised the possibility of Syracuse, a Corinthian colony in Sicily, and the association immediately revived the name of Archimedes. but a detailed later study argued that the month sequence cannot be Syracusan. The strongest candidate may instead be an epirote calendar, perhaps inherited through the Corinthian colony of Ambracia. That would place the mechanism's intended civil time in northwestern Greece. But intended use is not the same as manufacture. A clock displaying London time does not have to be built in London. The calendar may identify the customer more clearly than the workshop. A tiny subsidiary dial strengthens that northwestern connection. Alongside the Olympic, Pythian, Nemean, and Isthmian games, the mechanism listed the Na festivals held at the sanctuary of Zeus at Dodona in Epirus. The Na were not one of the 4 great Pan-Hellenic crown games. Their appearance makes sense for someone with a specific interest in that region. Yet another damaged entry has been persuasively restored as the Heliea, a festival honoring the sun god Helios on Rhodes. 2 comparatively local celebrations appear beside events known across the Greek world, one pointing toward Epirus, the other toward Rhodes. That combination looks less like the signature of a single city than the preferences of a client. Someone may have ordered a universal astronomical instrument with local time and local festivals built into it. Then the star calendar pulls the map southward. Above and below the front display, the mechanism carried a parapegma, an almanac recording solstices, equinoxes, the sun's movement into zodiacal signs, and characteristic risings and settings of stars and constellations at dawn or dusk. Around 42 index letters on the zodiac scale connected dates to these events. Because the timing of a star's first or last seasonal appearance changes with latitude, researchers have compared the surviving entries with different locations. One analysis found the best overall fit near 35 degrees north, too far south for Epirus, but close to Rhodes. Yet even that is not a workshop address. Astronomical tables could be copied, inherited, and carried across the Mediterranean just as easily as mathematical texts. Rhodes, nevertheless, remains a powerful candidate. It was a major maritime center with a strong bronze-working tradition and an international reputation for astronomy. Hipparchus, whose lunar theory is often compared with the mechanism's variable motion system, was associated with the island. The probable Heliea entry belongs there. A ship following an eastern Mediterranean route could have called there before reaching Antikythera. Ancient literature also connects Rhodes with a mechanical model of the heavens made by the philosopher Posidonius. Taken together, these clues form an impressive case, but they remain circumstantial. Nothing engraved on the fragments names Rhodes, Hipparchus, Posidonius, or any Rhodian workshop. A concentration of plausible associations can still produce a story more certain than the evidence. The Archimedes theory is even more seductive because it begins with a genuine ancient account. Cicero describes a device attributed to Archimedes that had been taken from Syracuse after the Roman capture of the city. When turned, it represented the different motions of the sun, moon, and 5 visible planets, and it could demonstrate eclipse relationships. That description sounds astonishingly close to the world reconstructed on the front of Antikythera. But similarity does not establish identity. Archimedes died during the capture of Syracuse in 212 BCE, before the likely construction period of the surviving mechanism and long before the shipwreck. No surviving inscription names him. No chain of ownership connects his instruments to the corroded fragments. At most, Cicero shows that Antikythera belonged to an older tradition of mechanical astronomy, in which Archimedes may have been an extraordinary early figure. The mechanism itself also resists the legend of a solitary genius. The handwriting on the back cover inscription differs from the writing elsewhere, indicating that at least 2 people participated in producing the object. Its creation required astronomical theory, numerical period relations, geometric modeling, precision bronze work, miniature lettering, and an intimate understanding of how a user would operate the displays. One person could theoretically have possessed all those skills, but collaboration is more plausible. Ancient literary sources contain roughly 20 references to astronomical mechanisms over the centuries surrounding the artifact. Most of those machines disappeared because bronze was valuable, instruments were dismantled, and wood decayed. Antikythera may therefore be unique because it survived a shipwreck, not because no other workshop knew how to build anything like it. The wreck reveals the mechanism's final journey, but not its origin. The vessel was a large merchant ship carrying amphorae, fine glassware, jewelry, coins, marble sculpture, bronze statues, and other valuable objects toward the western Mediterranean, probably in the direction of Roman-controlled markets. The mechanism was being transported with that cargo. It was not a steering instrument, and nothing demonstrates that sailors used it to calculate their position. It might have been a commissioned object on its way to a wealthy buyer, a second-hand possession, a diplomatic gift, merchandise intended for sale, or even an item acquired through plunder. Every possibility produces a different story. The shipwreck tells us where the mechanism died. It does not tell us where it was born, who owned it, or why it was aboard. Its probable purpose must therefore be reconstructed from the relationship between the operator and the displays. Turn the input and the machine connected a civil calendar with lunar months, eclipse cycles, athletic festivals, seasonal star events, the moon's phase, and the modeled movement of celestial bodies. The inscriptions assume an educated reader, but not necessarily a professional astronomer. One major scholarly review has argued that the mechanism's inherent approximations make it unlikely to have been primarily a precision calculator for detailed astronomical work. As an educational or cultural display, however, those limitations matter less. Its power lay in gathering the known structure of time into one object. It could demonstrate that phenomena which appeared irregular, retrograde planets, shifting lunar speed, eclipses, and intercalated months, belonged to intelligible cycles. That does not make it a prophecy machine. The Saros dial warned that an eclipse was possible in a particular lunar month and supplied modeled characteristics, but it could not guarantee that every solar eclipse would be visible from the operator's location. The planetary display may have been useful in an astrological culture, but no surviving text on the device instructs the user to cast a horoscope or interpret an omen. Nothing on it provides the observations required to determine a ship's position at sea. And although it could represent dates across long cycles, it did not calculate arbitrary questions like a modern computer. Its extraordinary achievement was narrower and more coherent. It made recurring celestial relationships visible, repeatable, and discussable. Popular theories often inflate the mechanism by ignoring what its interface actually asks the operator to do. A plausible scenario now begins to emerge, though it remains only a scenario. A mathematically sophisticated workshop, possibly on Rhodes, could have built the instrument for a patron connected with Epirus, installing an Epirote civil calendar, and the Na games while retaining a star almanac developed for a mid-Mediterranean latitude. The Haleia could preserve the workshop's local signature. Babylonian period relations could have reached the designer through Greek astronomy, while older traditions of sphere-making associated with Archimedes supplied the mechanical ambition. Later, the completed object traveled west among luxury goods and works of art. This would explain why the clues do not agree. But another workshop using copied Rhodian data could produce the same mixture. The reconstruction is persuasive precisely because it remains testable, not because it has become fact. And this brings us to the final error behind almost every dramatic Antikythera theory. Researchers and storytellers search for one decisive label: Archimedes' computer, a Rhodian planetarium, an Epirote calendar, a navigator's instrument, an astrologer's machine, or a lost civilization artifact. The surviving object was probably more complicated than any one of those identities. Its bronze preserves a calculation system. Its inscriptions preserve an interface. Its calendars preserve a user's world. Its cargo context preserves only its final movement. In Part 6, we will rank those layers from established evidence to unsupported speculation, and finally identify the missing piece that changes the entire verdict. Because the feature most reconstructions hide may reveal that the mechanism was not designed merely to predict the heavens. It was designed to teach someone how to read them. The missing piece was never just another gear. It was the person standing in front of the Antikythera mechanism. Modern reconstructions invite us to look through transparent cases at exposed wheels, axles, and epicycles. The ancient operator would have seen almost none of that. The gears were hidden behind bronze plates and a wooden frame. What faced the user were scales, pointers, miniature celestial markers, index letters, eclipse symbols, calendar names, and dense explanatory inscriptions. Remove those outer surfaces, as documentaries often do, to reveal the spectacular machinery, and the object becomes visually impressive but historically incomplete. We begin admiring how it moved while forgetting the more important question: how was someone supposed to understand what that movement meant? The claim that 90% of theories are wrong is not a measured statistic from a survey of Antikythera scholarship. It is a test of how theories are constructed. A theory becomes unreliable when it presents a possible reconstruction as a recovered fact, when it uses one working replica to exclude every alternative, or when it gives a famous name to an object that never names its maker. The mechanism survives in 3 different layers. There is physical evidence: bronze inscriptions, holes, gear teeth, and traces of lost supports. There are strong deductions that connect those remains into functions. And there are imaginative completions required wherever the evidence disappears. The great mistake is not speculation itself. Reconstruction would be impossible without it. The mistake is allowing speculation to cross into certainty without announcing that it has crossed the line. At the foundation, the evidence is extraordinary enough. 82 fragments preserve approximately 1/3 of the original machine and 30 bronze gears. The rear displays organized a 235-month Metonic calendar cycle and a 223-month Saros eclipse cycle. A subsidiary dial extended eclipse information across additional Saros periods, while another marked major athletic festivals. Surviving gearing modeled the moon's changing apparent speed, and a small rotating sphere represented its phases. The front included a zodiac scale, an Egyptian calendar, and an index star calendar. These functions are not legends invented around a mysterious lump of corrosion. They emerge from surviving components, readable tooth counts, physical relationships, and inscriptions recovered through modern imaging. Any interpretation that denies this astronomical and calendrical core has already abandoned the artifact. The next layer is strongly supported but less mechanically complete. The cover inscriptions describe the sun and planets as small spheres on the front display, and the front cover text records synodic events associated with Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. It preserves the remarkable numbers 462 for Venus and 442 for Saturn, periods that can be translated into accurate, gear-friendly planetary relationships. This makes it very difficult to dismiss planetary information as a modern fantasy. But it does not reveal every missing wheel. The inscriptions tell us what the user was meant to see more clearly than they tell us how the maker produced it. A planetary sphere is evidence. A particular nested tube carrying that sphere is a reconstruction. A period relation is evidence. The exact sequence of gears realizing that relation may still be one of several mechanically possible solutions. This is why the most famous modern models can disagree while remaining serious scholarship. Michael Wright demonstrated that planetary motions could be generated through compact epicyclic gearing and displayed with coaxial pointers. The 2021 University College London model proposed planetary rings carried by nested tubes, supported by newly reconstructed gear trains and the prime factors of the inscribed periods. Its authors also clearly identified hypothetical additions, including a lunar node hand and an indexing system for planetary events, and stated that the loss of evidence prevents their model from being called a replica of the original. Then, in February 2026, another research team argued from prolonged experience with functional bronze reconstructions that two important indicators were missing from prevailing models, and that the device may have been primarily a self-contained lunisolar time calculator rather than a complete planetary positioner. The debate is not over. Yet that recent challenge reveals something more important than which reconstruction eventually wins. Its authors reached their conclusions by asking what happened when a person actually operated the machine. Could the user obtain the required information directly? Did the display provide enough indicators to interpret its cycles without performing calculations elsewhere? Did the mechanism behave like a complete instrument or like a modern model built to demonstrate one favored theory? Those questions return the operator to the center of the investigation. A reconstruction can reproduce a period perfectly and still misunderstand the artifact if it cannot explain how the result was read. The user is not an optional figure placed beside the finished machine. The user's needs determine the scales, labels, markers, and perhaps even the architecture of the hidden gearing. Viewed from that perspective, the inscriptions form a system rather than a collection of technical notes. Alphabetic characters on the zodiac connected positions to the star calendar. Letters inside the Saros spiral directed the reader toward additional eclipse information. The back cover text systematically described the machine's external displays, including features that no longer survive. The front cover text organized planetary events and the intervals between them. Calendar scales allowed movement to be translated into dates. Small spheres distinguished celestial bodies, while specialized glyphs compressed complex eclipse information into limited space. This was information architecture in bronze. The mechanism did not merely calculate cycles and leave the operator to guess what the gears had done. It attempted to guide the eye from motion, to symbol, to written explanation, and finally to astronomical meaning. An operator could rotate the input through a chosen span of time and watch several relationships change together. The calendar advanced. The moon moved against the zodiac and altered its phase. The rear pointers traveled through month cells containing eclipse predictions. Festival cycles changed. Seasonal star events could be located through the indexed parapegma. If a planetary display occupied the missing front, the operator could also follow modeled stations, reversals, conjunctions, or oppositions. The machine, therefore, offered something more revealing than a single answer. It allowed time to be explored. The person using it could move backward, advance into a future cycle, compare two celestial motions, or examine why an eclipse became possible only in certain months. That makes an educational or demonstrative purpose plausible, although it does not prove that the mechanism belonged to a school or was built solely for teaching. Several dramatic theories collapse once this interface is restored. A navigation instrument should provide the observations and variables needed to determine a ship's position. The surviving displays instead emphasize repeating astronomical and calendrical cycles. An oracle should instruct the user how to interpret events as divine messages. The mechanism supplies predictions and descriptions, not a surviving system of prophecy. Its outputs could certainly have been used within an astrological culture, but no preserved instruction tells the operator to calculate a horoscope. Attributing the surviving object directly to Archimedes confuses evidence for an older tradition of celestial machines with evidence for this specific machine's maker. And theories of a vanished supercivilization are unnecessary. The mathematics, terminology, calendar systems, astronomical periods, and literary parallels all belong within the connected Greek and Babylonian scientific world of the Hellenistic Mediterranean. The safest conclusion is therefore broader than any single label. The Antikythera Mechanism was a portable astronomical compendium that integrated calendars, lunar theory, eclipse cycles, seasonal star information, and probably planetary phenomena into one coordinated display. It may have served several purposes at once. A scholar could use it to investigate cycles. A teacher could demonstrate why apparently irregular celestial events repeated. A wealthy owner could display both learning and status. An astrologer could potentially consult some of its outputs without the machine itself being exclusively astrological. Its craftsmanship made it a luxury object, but luxury did not make it scientifically empty. Ancient categories did not have to separate education, research, spectacle, social prestige, religion, and astronomy as sharply as modern explanations often do. And now the title's promise can finally be answered. Most theories about the Antikythera Mechanism go wrong because they treat the missing metal as permission to build almost anything. They begin with the gears they hope existed and then search for clues that support them. The stronger approach begins outside the gearbox, with the information the ancient operator was meant to receive. The overlooked missing piece is the human being made visible by the inscriptions. Restore that person, and the covers cease to be packaging. They become part of the computation. The dials cease to be decoration. They become questions the machine was designed to answer. A reconstruction that turns correctly but cannot explain how an ancient user read it may be mechanically possible, yet historically incomplete. The mechanism's greatest achievement was not that bronze could imitate the sky with perfect accuracy. It could not. Its achievement was that someone transformed mathematical relationships into a physical experience. Years became rotations. Lunar irregularity became an offset pin sliding through a slot. Eclipse cycles became cells and glyphs. Planetary theory became numbers, gears, and perhaps small spheres moving across a miniature cosmos. For the first time known to us in surviving machinery, a person could place a hand on an instrument and make centuries pass in moments. The final mystery is no longer whether the ancient Greeks were capable of building such a device. The corroded fragments prove that they were. It is what the first operator believed while watching the heavens move beneath their fingers: a calculator, a lesson, a model of cosmic order, or proof that even the most bewildering sky could be understood.